In the early days of the investigation into the 1997 murder of rapper Biggie Smalls, most members of Biggie's entourage the night he was killed were cooperative with detectives, with some giving multiple interviews in those first few days and months. And they seemed to be honestly trying to share everything they saw that night with detectives. This was in sharp contrast to the gang members who were in Tupac's entourage the night he was fatally shot in Las Vegas 6 months earlier, who stuck to the street code and refused to cooperate with police. And with the exception of the members of Tupac's Outlaws backup group who were in the car behind him when the shooting took place, Pac was mostly surrounded by people that night who he'd only known for a matter of months. In contrast, when Biggie was killed in LA, he was with some of his closest friends, people who'd had his back for years before he was famous, like Lil Cease and Damian D-Rock Butler. But as the weeks went by and detectives contacted these witnesses for more follow-up interviews, it seems like someone may have wanted to control who detectives had access to. And the situation got so bad that Biggie's own mother had to intervene. The night of Biggie's murder, cursory field interviews were conducted with witnesses and members of his entourage at both the hospital and at 2 local hotels that they were staying at. Biggie's hotel, the Westwood Marquis in Westwood, and the Universal Sheraton near Universal Studios. These field interview cards are light on details, mostly confirming their name, physical description, address, and maybe a few words regarding what they'd witnessed. Lil Cease was interviewed twice at the hospital that night, and then at the Universal Sheraton a few hours later. He described sitting behind Biggie when the shooting happened, that the shooter's car was a dark green, 4-door American-make vehicle, and that approximately 7 shots were fired into Biggie's vehicle. But when Puffy was interviewed at the hospital at 2:30 in the morning, just an hour and 15 minutes after Biggie was declared dead, he didn't give his address, and the card claims he did not want to give any more info at this time. In those first few days, detectives interviewed at least a half-dozen members of Biggie's entourage from the night of his murder. But by the time of Biggie's funeral on March 18th, a week and a half after his murder, Combs still hadn't met with detectives. Finally, 2 days after Biggie's funeral, detectives met with Puffy at his attorney's office in New York City. Likewise, when Tupac was fatally shot 6 months earlier, it had taken detectives days to get the death row CEO, Suge Knight, to meet with them. Suge canceled twice before finally showing up, flanked by 3 attorneys. And just like Suge, Puffy is surrounded by attorneys when he meets with LA detectives, one-upping Suge with 4 lawyers at his side. But Diddy gave a pretty detailed interview about their time in LA, the party the night Big was killed, and the shooting itself. But he doesn't really tell detectives anything they don't already know. And at the end, the interview summary states he did not owe anyone money and he did not hire any gang members to provide security for his staff. And he doesn't know who would have wanted to kill Biggie. But it seems like Puff must have known at least 2 groups of people who might have wanted Biggie dead. The Crips from Compton, based on rumors that Biggie owed them money, and Associates of Death Row, for revenge for Tupac's murder. Those seem to have always been the 2 leading theories for Biggie's murder. Following this first interview with Puffy and his team of attorneys, one of those lawyers seems to have inserted himself into the investigation moving forward, making himself a middleman between detectives and witnesses. I should note here that this attorney is referred to as an attorney for Bad Boy by detectives in the case files, but it's possible he was a personal attorney for Puffy or both. While still out in New York, detectives are notified that interviews with Puffy's bodyguard, Gene Deal, and friend Anthony Jacobs are canceled because this attorney claims he can't locate them. But when detectives catch up with Gene Deal over the phone 6 days later, they mention having trouble finding him. And Gene Deal's like, I'm not that hard to find.
What's going on, buddy?
Well, we trying to get in touch with you, man. We was up in New York for a while.
I'm not hard to find.
Well, they say you couldn't find you.
Yeah, they wasn't trying to find me.
And Paul Offord, who was Bad Boy's head of security at the time, who'd already been interviewed by detectives, refuses to meet with them again, claiming he'd been interviewed twice in Los Angeles and that was enough. His whereabouts are reported as unknown. And during their trip to New York around Biggie's funeral, it also takes detectives a few days to reach Biggie's estranged wife, Faith Evans. And when they eventually talk to her, she changes her mind about meeting them in person and insists they do the interview over the phone. On March 24th, detectives conducted a phone interview with Anthony Jacobs, who had been riding in Puffy's vehicle ahead of Biggie's when the shooting happened. And this company attorney is on the call, listening in. That attorney's voice is altered here.
Anthony Jacobs is now picking up the phone. Anthony, you're speaking with Detective Kelly Cooper and Detective Bill Scott, Wilshire Homicide. They're going to be asking you a few questions. Go ahead, detectives.
Anthony, how you doing? I'm all right. Good.
But the attorney tells detectives that they should come to him first if they want to talk to Jacobs again in the future.
There comes a point in time when you need to speak to Mr. Jacobs in the future. I'd appreciate if you reach out to me, and I'll put you in touch with him.
A month later, Puffy is interviewed by detectives for a second time. But this interview is shorter, and afterwards, his attorney apparently tells detectives that after numerous interviews, they request no more complete re-interviews and request that they interview to clarify facts only. And following a re-interview of Biggie's driver at the time of the shooting, Gregory G. Money Young, that same attorney from the Jacobs phone call tells detectives that any further contacts with an employee of Bad Boy Entertainment be arranged by him. But according to Anthony Jacobs, he worked as a mechanic and didn't work for Bad Boy. So why is a company attorney involved in his police interview? And of course, it's perfectly legal for an attorney to do this, and this person may have felt like they really were helping connect detectives with witnesses. But I think having a Bad Boy attorney involved in these interviews could have had two potentially negative effects on the investigation. One, it's an extra step detectives have to take in order to get a hold of a witness, potentially slowing them down. And two, I wonder if it doesn't restrict what witnesses are willing to say to detectives, knowing a company man with a direct line to the CEO is listening to everything. In fact, a detective's note on the phone interview with Jacobs refers to what the attorney was doing as monitoring. And at one point during this interview, the attorney even interrupts the questioning and puts the detectives on hold for about 25 seconds, seemingly so he can confer with the witness.
You know cars well? Huh? You know cars very well?
Can you hold on a second, detective?
Yeah.
All right, we're back on the line.
Okay, you there?
What car do you think it was? I just asked Tony what kind of car he thought it was.
Yeah. It looked like a one of them new Impalas. Impala? Yeah.
Eventually, Biggie's driver, G Money Young, also rebuffed attempts at future interviews, with an entry in the case file stating that Young sounds reluctant to assist investigating officers any further, and that he states he is trying to get his music career going and does not want any distractions. A few months later, the Bad Boy attorney tells detectives that Young won't talk to them again without a subpoena or a court order. But in defense of Young, by then he had already given 2 interviews to detectives, and over time, other witnesses did even more. Ken Story, who was Puffy's driver when Big was killed, and the head of the LA security company that Bad Boy had hired, was interviewed at least 4 times in the first 5 days after Biggie's murder. Puffy's bodyguard that night, Gene Deal, would also do at least 4 interviews. But there's another factor when considering the reluctance of some of these other witnesses to talk to police. Fear. A Wilshire homicide detective at the time wrote in a report, because of the celebrity status of the victim in this case, many of the potential witnesses that have been contacted are reluctant to cooperate for fear of media attention and/or the fear of violence recently associated with rap music. He references a recent Unsolved Mysteries episode about the Tupac case that, quote, focused on the murder of the only identified eyewitness in Tupac's murder. And of course, he's talking about Yaki Gaddafi, aka Yafe Afula, who had been murdered himself just weeks after Tupac's murder. And the side effects of that murder are now spreading to the Biggie case, even though it's determined that Fula's murder was unrelated. The tourist who filmed Bad Boy's entourage driving away from the Peterson Automotive Museum moments before the murder also referred to Fula's murder and claimed she feared for her safety. LA detectives even paid for one of these witnesses to relocate after local news media found her address and began trespassing. The Bad Boy attorney even brought up these concerns at the beginning of the Anthony Jacobs phone interview, telling detectives that as far as he knew, Jacobs was the first witness to say he saw the shooter's car, and that they didn't want Jacobs' name in the press.
This is confidential information. Mr. Jacobs is really the first one, at least as far as I've been helping out in this investigation, that saw the car. So we would like this treated as a confidential matter. I know that you guys treat this as, we don't want to see his name out in the press.
No, we won't do that at all.
By November of 1997, 8 months into the Biggie murder investigation with no breakthrough in the case, his mother, Valletta Wallace, expressed frustration and anger to Detective Russell Poole that no arrest had been made. Poole then told her about the lack of cooperation from Puffy Combs et al. Bad Boy Entertainment and Biggie's own entourage's lack of further assistance with the investigation. Valletta then says that she'll help get more witnesses to cooperate. And this is just further evidence of what I highlighted in the last episode, where Valletta Wallace is basically acting as her own investigator, trying to help solve her son's murder.
Listen, I'm a little confused about something, man. When I talked to Miss Wallace said that some guy had taken Biggie down to Compton earlier that day. Oh, yeah? Yeah, she said you told her that.
And it must have worked, because 2 months later, the Bad Boy attorney helped arrange another round of follow-up interviews with Puffy, G-Money, and Paul Offord. And by this point, detectives were able to show them the home video of Bad Boy's entourage driving away from the party right before Biggie's murder, to see if they could identify any suspects. But by this time, it's been 10 months since the murders, and in my opinion, detectives were spinning their wheels, re-interviewing witnesses again and again with diminishing returns. 7 years after Biggie's murder, in June of 2004, Puffy was interviewed about the case again in New York, this time in a deposition for the Biggie Estates lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles over Biggie's murder. A deputy city attorney for the city of LA and detectives with the LAPD's Risk Management Division were there along with attorneys for Biggie's estate. But according to the LAPD's lead detective on the Biggie case, who was also there, Combs refused to submit to the deposition with detectives present. And I think this may have helped ensure that the deposition didn't turn into an interrogation. Because through the city attorney, detectives still had Puffy questioned about Biggie's murder and whether he had paid Crips or gang members for Wallace's security in Los Angeles. To which he answered, no. And then there's the question of the reward money offered to the public for any information concerning Biggie's murder. Diddy apparently didn't offer any. Biggie's mother put up the reward money herself, and in this letter from the late Valletta Wallace to the original lead homicide detective in Biggie's case, she explains that she's increasing the amount of the reward from $10,000 to $25,000. And detectives convinced the city of Los Angeles to match that amount, making the total reward $50,000. But it doesn't appear that Diddy offered a single cent, which incensed both detectives and at least one of Biggie's friends, as evidenced in this tense interview with Damian Butler.
You know, we ended up having to pull a lot of teeth to try to get just $50,000. We had to go to our city council and we had to pull teeth to get 25 grand. Okay, 25. Okay,
I know.
We're dealing with Puffy. Didn't.
A millionaire.
Exactly. Thank you.
Millionaire. You're not telling me nothing. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. I don't deal with this.
Now listen.
I don't deal with
Why
this.
is that?
Why should I? I wasn't close.
No, I'm not saying you. I'm saying why Biggie was his biggest artist, correct? Am I correct?
You're damn right.
Why wouldn't he even put $10,000 up? Ask me that.
You can ask me.
And he's close to the zip guy, and nobody seems to know the zip guy.
And I wonder if someone felt that the LAPD may have dug far enough into the Biggie case. I wonder if someone was concerned about what else the people closest to Biggie might tell the police about. After all, the Southside Crips, Tupac's alleged killers, were witnessed hanging around Biggie and other New York artists in the year leading up to Tupac's murder, and again at the Peterson Automotive Museum, walking up to Biggie's table the night of his murder. And witnesses from Biggie's entourage were telling this to detectives.
Okay, you saw that guy at number 2 there, huh?
Yep.
So you saw that guy when you was on the Joseph tour? Same guy?
Same guy. Same dude, right there. Yep. I saw him that night. I know that face. I saw him twice.
That face is Keefy D.
So we're sitting around the leader party. You know, the guy in Compton is still in there. They come over.
What they say? Did they come over and speak to you guys?
Yeah.
Speak to Puffy and
I
Big?
speak to him just like, yo, what's up, what's happening?
Where did these guys from Compton approach you and ask you for, did you want them to provide security?
Did I want security
Yeah.
at that place?
At the party?
Yeah.
At the museum?
Yeah.
Detectives had already concluded that the murders of Tupac and Biggie were likely connected. And if cops in LA started asking witnesses about Tupac's murder, where might that lead?